Hi, I'm Scott Mayman. Some of you know me already, others may have just heard my voice. But for the past 30 years, I've been using my voice to broadcast news, programs, and even commercials. It all started at 4EB Community Radio in Brisbane. And I've mentored many fine up-and-coming journos and broadcasters since then, like Darren Madigan, who you'll hear a bit later, all part of this broadcast retrospect, 30 years in 30 minutes.
Hello, this is Bruce Page from 9 News. Over the years, there have been so many news events that impact on our everyday lives, whether it's an international story or in our own backyard. Scott has sat in the presenter's chair anchoring these stories as they happen. But Scott's not just an anchor, he's a dedicated reporter. From Queensland's Fitzgerald inquiry to the September 11 attacks, Scott has been on the forefront of these stories over the past 30 years. This is Bruce Page wishing Scotty a job well done. Congratulations on your 30th anniversary of broadcasting.
Scott Mayman, or as we know him at 101, Scott Fox has been on multiple radio stations, not just in Australia, but overseas as well. Now, I've got a question for you, Scott. Where did it all begin?
August 1985. I was still in school, and a friend told me about this youth radio program called Rats on a community radio station at 4EB. It was AM radio back then. Have a listen to where it all began. And please disregard the fact that at the time, I had a rather high-sounding voice.
We're playing your music, got you covered in movies, employment for young ones and videos too. We'll play your requests, nothing but the best. We've got all the rock news we used to have been used. Radio, radio rats, the rhythm of the city, of the city. Radio, 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 radio rats.
Catch us Fridays 4:30.
4EB.
This is Radio Rats. And that's all we've got time for this evening, so thank you very much for your company. Don't forget to join us again Friday afternoon at 4:30. Meanwhile, we'll take you out with Donald Fagan and IGY. Thanks very much for your company, and bye for now.
And from the glory days of Radio Rats on 4EB, I then found myself in commercial radio.
Jack Herbert's finally taken the witness stand at the Fitzgerald inquiry. That story heads the 5 o'clock news. Good afternoon from the Fitzgerald inquiry. I'm Scott Mayman.
4CC, first with Central Queensland News.
It's 7:56. Good morning. I'm Scott Mayman. An estimated $100,000 damage has been caused to a wharf in Gladstone Harbour.
First for news, sport and information. Radio 97.
At 7:30, good morning. I'm Scott Mayman with Tweed Gold Coast News. Willumbar rolls out the red carpet tonight with a visit by New South Wales Governor Peter Sinclair. Coast Rock FM, 21 degrees at 11 o'clock. Good morning, I'm Scott Mayman.
4BH, Macquarie National News.
An arrest made during wild scenes at a New South Wales court over the death of a 6-year-old boy. That story heads the 5 o'clock news. Good afternoon, I'm Scott Mayman.
2SM News.
The Premier implicated in the report into the Metherell affair, and Peter Allen dead at 48. Those stories lead 2SM News at 6, currently 14 degrees in Sydney. Good evening, I'm Scott Mayman.
4BC, 1116 News.
It's 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Scott Mayman.
Wake up! Rise and shine!
But I would have to say 101 FM is where I have enjoyed radio the most. I brought over Radio Rats from the AM dial to the FM dial for a little while, and also it saw the introduction of Three's Company as well. But who could forget the days where I was on air during the breakfast program, which started at 6? Of course, I wouldn't roll in until 6:05.
Good evening. Welcome to Saturday Night Variety Show. Tonight, Three's Company on 101 FM.
Three's Company was a lot of fun back on a Saturday night, 10 p.m. to midnight. Of course, later, I did leave 101 FM and I left Australia, bound for the United States.
710 KCMO, Kansas City's talk station.
Getting the news this hour, 14 dead in a Chicago nightclub. The snow continues in the east.
The city ready with 1,800 snowplows.
Kansas City's price at the pump gets worse.
You have to pay it if you want to drive.
And a milestone for The Simpsons.
It's wonderful, Marge.
20 degrees at 8 o'clock, sunny today with a top of 47. Good morning, I'm Scott Mayman, Talk Radio 710 KCMO News.
Kansas City's classic rock 101 The Fox inside a 40-minute commercial free ride, and it's by your request. 576. Excuse me, sir. Sir.
How's great? How are you?
It's Dudley Moore.
How's great to be here. I love DJs. You ask them for things and they bring them to you.
Well, what can I... We're inside an all-request show. What can I get for you?
What's this? Oops, I'm afraid that's a goner.
Yeah.
How about a Scotch and Scotch?
Well, I can't really get that by request, but music-wise, what can I get you?
Oh, music, of course. I'm not quite sober this morning, so how about Numbly Come by Pink Floyd?
You mean Comfortably Numb?
Oh, I was... Yes, that one. And have you got any ice?
Having a lot of fun on the radio in the United States. Of course, it wasn't always fun. There was that dark day in 2001. One of my colleagues was killed in the Twin Towers that day.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
At this time, there is no imminent threat to Kansas City. Emergency operations went on standby at 8:50 this morning. And I have to tell you guys, I have never seen such a stampede of police in Kansas City.
You mean, Scott, just moving around town here today?
It's almost like a military force in action.
This is the sound and the scene of controlled panic and pandemonium around the White House.
We're going to be going to City Hall soon. We'll be hearing from Mayor Kay Barnes.
Our city is strong. City Hall was closed at 10:30 this morning, and I wanted to mention that housing hotline.
We lost friends. We lost loved ones. We lost people today. People's lives were precious to a lot of people in America, but we didn't lose the American spirit today.
Admittedly, that is a down moment in broadcasting. But let me assure you, there are some highlights, particularly when you get to interview some of your favourite stars.
Like sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives.
Each weekday at 1:30, many households down tools and watch one of Australia's favourite US daytime soapies. It is, of course, Days of Our Lives. And joining us today is one of the favourites from the show, Gloria Loring. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Scott.
Now, you must get sick of hearing that tune day after day, do you?
I don't hear it day after day because I don't watch the show. I never have the television on during the show. I don't watch TV during the day. I'm a little too busy. I have 2 teenage boys and I have several careers. And so, but I do know that the show is very much enjoyed. And this is the 4th time I've been to Australia, and the fans, I've been off the show for a couple of years here in Australia, and the fans are still talking about Liz, so I guess they enjoyed her.
Now, Liz was in the show for how many years?
6.5 years.
6.5 years?
Yes.
Married to Neil the doctor.
Dr. Neil Curtis, right. Yes.
Interviewing Gloria Loring from Days of Our Lives was something I will always remember, as I will with my very first interview with Bert Newton, Old Moonface. 1992, Radio 2KY was the studio where I welcomed him for the very first time.
A pleasure, Scott.
Tell me, where did it all begin for you?
I started in radio when I was a kid. I was 12, 13 years of age, and I used to operate in children's programs. When I say operate, I basically did that in a technical sense, played the records and no carts or tapes back in those years, and read commercials and acted plays and wrote plays occasionally. And when I left school, I got a job at the radio station where I'd been operating, and from there went into television.
Now, you read news at one stage, didn't you?
I actually joined television to be a newsreader, but it didn't come about. I haven't done a lot of news reading, but very early in my career I did some television news reading and certainly some news reading in radio, because back in those years everybody read the news. But when I went to television to be a newsreader, a variety compere who'd started in Melbourne, the first Tonight Show on television, left the station, left the network, and I replaced him. Fine actor, a man called Noel Ferrier. And so I went into variety and have stayed there ever since, and haven't really returned to news reading for any length, except occasionally if all of a sudden there was an illness on the station or the chief newsreader took suddenly drunk, I'd replace him just for that night.
One interview that was not a problem was with Graham Cole. He's from the TV show The Bill. Now, if you watch the show, you'll know him as PC Tony Stamp, and it was such a delight to have him in the studio.
We were just at the putt-putt having a good time when you called us, Scotty boy.
Oh,
Your
great.
Spies were out, huh?
Fantastic to have you on the coast.
Bless you, that's really good to be here.
Oh, now, you've been here a week or so. What have you enjoyed most?
The rain. It made me just feel so British. That was really sad. I can't tell you how cursing we were. The thing that's amazing is the number of people that just stopped to say hello since we've been wandering around.
We're very friendly here on the coast.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Actually, to Australia, so it's been fantastic. It really is glorious to meet everyone. It's fantastic.
Well, I've got another question for you with the bill. And it involves a shooting or police officers being shot, I think last year or the year before, and apparently there was a real-life sniper out there at the Bill. What was happening there?
What is quite scary about us is that when we're in uniform, people just think we're real. So we do get a heck of a lot of abuse. We hide our cameras away, so when we're filming on the streets of London, the actual passers-by are real passers-by. They're not aware really that we're shooting anything at all. They're going about their business. And this particular guy, he was up on about the 7th floor of a block of flats, just taking pot shots at us with an air rifle. In fact, it was Roberta Taylor that took the first little pellet in the back of her. It was in the winter shooting. So we've all got the stab vests on that most or real policemen, I should call them, wear. And she just took it in the back of her tunic, and it was quite scary because we keep shouting up, "We're not real." But you do that, and I was saying to somebody asked me a very similar question yesterday. Those lovely people that came to see us, and every now and again, one of the crew members heads up, and a fridge or a TV will come hurtling off of one of the landings.
Joking.
It's the reason the bill works is we film on the exact estates that we are mirror imaging, and so you take all of those social pressures that go with that. And when we're not filming, we're out signing, or we're chatting, or we're trying to do our bit for the community. It's a good show from that point of view, but elongates your working day somewhat.
I'm sure. Well, speaking of working days, I know a few years ago also they went to 3 episodes a week of The Bill.
Yeah.
How much of a workload was that? I mean, obviously people would have had to take time off.
Sure. Well, believe it or not, I have to give, or I did give, about 18 weeks' notice of this holiday, because I'm away for 5 weeks. So for the writers to work that all out, it took months and months to sort it out. I'm very fortunate my characters used a heck of a lot in the bill. Very, very fortunate about that. So really what we do is we have 4 units working back to back with each other now, because you're quite right, we've gone back to hour-longs. We were half hours, and now we've gone back to hour-longs. And it just means really we're commissioned for 98 one-hour episodes a year on the British network. And it is a hell of a workload.
Welcome to the coast, Tina Arena.
Hello, Scott.
Well, many will remember you from Young Talent Time, of course.
An hour of singing, dancing and great family fun with the stars of tomorrow. The team that Australia has taken to its heart each week for 12 years. Join Johnny Young and the Young Talent Team, 6:30 Saturdays on Channel 10.
When you're at home, you're home on 10.
Do you reflect much on those days as a 7-year-old on a TV variety show?
Well, those days were particularly wonderful. They were incredibly humble and innocent.
Yeah.
Certainly not what
is the reality of the business today.
Ouch. I still remember that interview. Being a tough one, actually. She was frank about a lot of things. I also remember this delightful piece from Tina Arena. It's the Spanish version of Sorrento Moon, I Remember. word from funny man Bill Cosby.
See, you're listening to Scotty Mayman. He's the main man on time land, on the thing land.
Finally, Scott, you've been a mentor for many people in radio, including yours truly. And we'd like to think everyone has a mentor in life. Who was your mentor all those years ago?
For that, Darren, we have to go back to Adelaide, South Australia, where I was born. Back then, news was at 6:30, not 6 o'clock, except on Channel 10. The newsreader was Tony Dickinson, a Walkley Award-winning journalist who'd seen it all and had done it all. I didn't know at the time, but many years later, Tony Dickinson became my boss, not once, but twice. It was a thrill to be working with this man who was my mentor, someone I used to watch on the TV reading the news, who then became my boss. I have great respect for Tony Dickinson, and it was a joy to interview him when the opportunity came up.
This is Eyewitness News, Total News, with Tony Dickinson, Jane Riley, and the entire Eyewitness News team.
It's probably been a long time since you've heard that, Tony. Does that bring back memories?
It surely does. It is a long time ago, but when you hear that, it's just like yesterday.
We're talking like 1979, 1980, 1981. It was the technology of the time. It was the format of the time, a 1-hour news bulletin, and you were one of the first news presenters to introduce it into the country. How did that come about?
We were told, well, I was told that we were going to go to an hour news. It seemed to be the technology from overseas, and we were going to give it a try, and it was a success. It took a long time for people to get used to it, but when I left Adelaide, I think it's true to say that we had the highest rating hour news service in Australia. In other words, our ratings were higher than Sydney and Melbourne for an hour service.
How do you find the news of today? We fast forward now 30 years. We've got satellite technology. We've got live eyes happening everywhere. How do you see it today compared with what news used to be?
Look, I guess it's hard to compare different eras. There was certainly a lot more excitement back in our day because we were virtually pioneering the technology of moving out of a studio and covering events, because to set up a live eye back in those days, it took half a day just for one story. This great truck would arrive. Now it's all mobile. They can do it in a couple of minutes. It's run of the mill. But to be honest, I don't think the standard of journalism is improved, even though the technology has. Most of the journalists, I'm sorry, I think the standard of journalism today is appalling. Most wouldn't know a story if they fell over one. They're handed stories by their producers. They can't go out and find a story. They all cover the same stories. Just if you're watching topical stories of today, it's just the same on every channel. There's nothing there that you think, oh, that person went out and really tried hard. It's just basic stuff. And the current affairs programs are, well, they're not current affairs programs, they're news magazine style programs, and they have very little to do with news and current affairs.
You've worked up and down the Australian coastline, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. You've lived on the Gold Coast as well. What city do you miss the most and why? And would you come back to the Gold Coast at any time?
I love coming back to the Gold Coast, and I love holidaying on the Gold Coast. I don't know whether at my time of life now, that I'd come back and live on the Gold Coast. Look, every Australian city is unique, and I've worked in all of them except Darwin, and they're all unique. They all have their appeal. I love Melbourne. I worked in Melbourne, and people, have dreadful things to say about Melbourne's weather, but the lifestyle and the shopping, the restaurants of Melbourne, Adelaide, you couldn't probably find a nicer place to live and work, but from a journalistic point of view, there's not a lot of big stories that happen in Adelaide. Brisbane's become a sophisticated city now. Back in my time, of course, it was probably a big country town.
Now, you were the program director of one of the radio stations at the time.
I was indeed. I'm glad you reminded me of that.
Are you really glad? Or are you going to help me down 37 steps any minute now?
Yeah, that wasn't one of my great career moves. No, look, it was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun in Brisbane, and I love Brisbane because it is a sophisticated city now, and it's a nice place to go. Sydney is one of those places that gets in your blood. Because I was born in New South Wales, Sydney was always the big city, the capital city.
Tony Dickinson reporting a bridge has collapsed on top of a train at the Granville railway station. Now, police on the scene say the bridge is heavy and several carriages have been crushed. Further news coming to hand, the police are appealing for heavy equipment to move the bridge off the train. A number of people have been trapped, according to the first reports from police. Further news again,
the Granville train disaster. You were one of the first news presenters to break the news on that day. How did that all work out?
Well, I was first. They say everyone has 15 minutes of fame. My name is forever associated with the Granville train disaster because I broke the news of it. Look, I was reading the 8 o'clock news at 2UE in Sydney, and the 8 o'clock bulletin went for about 7 minutes, and after that I put the copy back on the desk. I was actually heading downstairs towards the toilets when I heard "Dicko, Dicko, quick, news flash," raced back in towards the news booth. Someone handed me a piece of paper, and it had probably a dozen words on it at the most, probably only 9 or 10, which said train derailment, something along the lines of train derailment, Granville. And I ad-libbed a news flash from that, and as I was ad-libbing, more information was being slipped onto the desk, and from there it just developed into the huge story that it became.
Further news again, the collapsed bridge ran over Carlton Parade at Granville. Now that's the bridge over Carlton Parade at Granville. It has collapsed onto several carriages of a train. The carriages have been crushed, and police say a number of people have been trapped.
Does it still affect you today?
Yes, it's one of those stories that no one knew how big it was until about an hour or so into the story. We sent out a journalist, a fellow called John Walsh. He was a senior morning producer, and I was still there coordinating the news, a couple of hours later, because it was just a continual story. And he came in and he said, I was interviewing him about what he was witnessing, and he said, they're still rescuing people, and he said, I'm standing near a priest who's giving the last rites. And I said, well, that must be, something that you won't forget in a hurry. And he said, I was just talking to him a couple of minutes ago, and he said, I think this is going to be a far worse disaster than people think. And I said, why? And he said, well, he's given the last rites to people. But he said, I don't think I should talk about it. And I said, well, I think you should talk about it. What did he tell you? And he hesitated, and he was the first person to come out with a figure. And he said, look, the priest told me that the death toll's going to be certainly in the 70s up towards the 80s. And at that stage, we were only talking, 10, 15, 20 type of thing. So at that point, the enormity of the situation became apparent, and that was the first time that we realised just how big this story was.
Tony Dickinson, a storyteller himself. He's been around the traps. He knows news when he sees it. Formerly from the Gold Coast, working in Brisbane, back home in Sydney now. Thanks for your time today.
You're very welcome, Scotty.
Sadly, Tony Dickinson passed away from cancer in 2014. Well, that's a look at 30 years in 30 minutes. Thanks for being part of the journey with me. I'm Scott Mayman, signing off.